Hi everyone, welcome to ADHD 101. As the name suggests, in this video I'm going to be going right back to basics and talking about exactly what ADHD is, who it affects, and the three different presentations of ADHD. So I'm AJ Harman, for those of you who don't already know me. I'm the founder of this group and I'm a life coach who specialises in working with neurodivergent adults, mainly people with ADHD and autism, and generally people who have found out about their neurodivergency later in life. And are either seeking a diagnosis or trying to find out more about themselves, or who have just been diagnosed. So yeah, the reason I'm doing this, if you didn't catch my live last week, I explained that I'm going to be going live in this group every Friday at 1 o'clock, and the aim really would just be to talk about all different types of neurodivergency, and to kind of share a lot of the information that I've been learning since I had my diagnosis. I was diagnosed with ADHD and autism and depression a couple of years ago now, during lockdown in 2020. So it's been kind of my special interest ever since, finding out exactly what those things mean, especially kind of in combination. And I just want to share some of that information that I'm learning to help other people that are feeling the same, and trying to understand their lives through this kind of new lens, but also to kind of share some information as well for people who aren't neurodivergent, but are interested in finding out more, or perhaps have loved ones or friends who are neurodivergent. They want to find out a bit more. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm actually going to concentrate on ADHD to start with, because it is ADHD Awareness Month this month, October. So what I've started doing is sharing some little snippets of information on my main profile, so that kind of anybody can see those and raise some kind of a little bit of awareness and bust some of those myths that people have about ADHD, the sort of stereotypes that they think of. But then on the Friday, so there'll be a few of those through the week, and then on the Friday the live will be sort of covering those things that have been sort of in the posts, but in a little bit more detail. And if anyone's joining me live, you're welcome to ask me any questions. I can't promise I can answer them immediately, but I will do my best, and if there's anything that I'm not sure of, I will come back and read the comments and everything after, and I'll find out any information that I'm not quite sure of. So if you are watching live, drop a hashtag live in the comments, and if you're watching on replay, it'd be brilliant if you could put hashtag replay as well, because it's great to sort of catch up afterwards and see who's actually seeing these lives. Right, okay, so let's get started. So yeah, let's just start with what is ADHD basically. So it stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. You might have seen it in the past as just ADD, which is Attention Deficit Disorder. And also the World Health Organization, who used to characterize it or classify it as hyperkinetic disorder. And then in the most recent versions of the manuals that are used around the world, so the American one is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, and the latest one is version 5. That came out in 2012, and the World Health Organization one, which is the International Classification of Diseases, and that's at version 10 at the moment. Those two both now agree that the overall kind of term for both of those aspects, so sort of those two things that were originally classified separately, are actually all part of the same condition, and that is ADHD. So the main thing about ADHD, I guess, that most people probably think of, and this is me included as well before I knew anything about my own neurodivergency, is that, here we go. So just to underline the fact that this is live and that I have ADHD, and that also this is me basically being unmasked, just being myself, trying not to kind of mask and put on a show and be an actor and remember my lines. I'm just coming on as me, and that's the whole point of all of these lives. And one downside of that is that sometimes my mind will go blank. Sometimes I just will forget what I'm saying in the middle of what I'm saying. So that is going to happen, and I don't apologise for it. I will, I'll just pick it up. So I think what I was trying to say was that before I was diagnosed, I had the stereotypical view of ADHD, that it mainly affected children, and that of those children, it mainly affected boys. And you have this sort of stereotypical view of a young boy in a classroom that is disrupting the class, maybe can't sit still, and has bad behaviour. Actually, a lot of people think that it's bad behaviour, and they're just sort of naughty little boys. And often it was thought that it was due to bad parenting as well, which is another thing that's really led to a sort of stigma around this whole condition, and one of the reasons why I'm wanting to talk about it a lot more, to let people know that there's so much more to it than that, and it isn't just in little boys. So it isn't just in children, full stop. It used to be thought that it was in children, and then by the time they got to about 18, it kind of magically disappeared and everything was fine. And there weren't even drugs or anything licensed for use in adults at all. But now they do know it is basically a lifelong condition, and it's got nothing to do with how you're brought up, what your parents are like. It's, as with anything, there are going to be influences from that, but it is, it's a biological condition, and it's highly genetic, which is why you often get people who have children diagnosed then kind of start to think, oh, hang on, but it just seems so familiar to me. This is kind of how I've always been. That's often why it's not picked up, because it feels normal. Yeah, quite often adults discover that they are actually neurodivergent in some way. In this case, we're talking about ADHD, that they've got ADHD when they discover that their children do. So that's very common. And it's all to do with, it's basically how the nervous system's set up, so including the brain, but the whole nervous system is just set up in a different way to kind of a normal, for want of a better word, nervous system is described as neurotypical. So a neurodivergent one is set up in a different way, and different chemicals are working in a different way, or not working as well, and not as kind of available to the system, to the brain, and so that's how you get these various different traits. The names are actually quite misleading. First of all, I'll just talk about the three different presentations. So they used to think that they were actually subtypes of ADHD. That's what they were described as. But so since 2012, they've described them as presentations. They're just 3 different ways in which ADHD presents itself. So one of them is called predominantly inattentive. Another one is called predominantly hyperactive. And then you've got a combined type, which covers both of those. And that's the type that I've got. I've got the combined type. So the names of those presentations are actually quite misleading, and are often why people don't really understand how ADHD actually presents. So first of all, if we think about the inattentive type, so that really is misleading because it makes it sound as though, you know, we just can't pay attention to things, can't focus at all on things. But actually, the whole reason for that is because there's too much attention going on. So basically, the nervous system isn't able to filter out all of the sensory input that's coming in. So, you know, a neurotypical nervous system, you know, anybody's nervous system is receiving sort of millions of bits of information from all of our senses, from our eyes, from our ears, nose, you know, all the different senses all the time. But the brain is really, really good at filtering out all but the most important stuff and the things that you have to focus on. And the ADHD brain still does that, but it doesn't filter the things as well. So it's thought that there are, instead of kind of one primary thing to focus on at a time, it's thought that the ADHD brain is trying to battle with about 4 or 5 things at the same time. And it doesn't prioritise between them. They're just all these things are coming in at the same time. So it's really easy to be distracted. So that's the first thing. It's not actually a lack of attention. Some people describe it as inconsistent attention or a problem with regulating attention. So it can look like daydreaming. You know, quite often another kind of stereotype that's perhaps more thought of in girls is, you know, imagine a girl in the classroom who's staring out of the window and not paying attention to, you know, the teacher or what's doing the thing that she's supposed to be doing in the classroom. And basically that is because all of this other stuff that's kind of going on, it isn't even necessarily something that's going on out of the window. It's something that's maybe going on in her mind, and she's caught up with that. And you know, I really like the idea actually that the kind of rich inner world that we have is so much more interesting a lot of the time than what's going on around us. You know, if we're not interested in what's going on, particularly, you know, a child in a classroom and they're not interested in the subject, it's a lot harder to pay attention to that than all the other wonderful things that they're thinking about. So that's sometimes what's going on. And this presentation also has issues with working memory. So this is where it's not so much that we're not laying down the memories, it's kind of how we access them. It's really hard. It's like, you know, imagine a kind of I was going to say a filing system, but there isn't a system. It's all in there, but it's not in alphabetical order. You can't find the particular bit that you want necessarily right at the moment when you want it. It's a bit like that. So and that's why we can be quite forgetful and we can lose things a lot. I've always lost things a lot, left umbrellas on the tube, and, you know, constantly, all that kind of thing. So that's the inattentive type. And then the hyperactive type, again, it's really misleading because there are some people who really present with physical hyperactivity and they can't stop moving, yeah, it's just like a very obvious physical hyperactivity. But then for a lot of people, it's actually internal. So it's racing thoughts, not being able to stop the thoughts going round and round, and that can be really difficult at night time, for instance, when you're trying to get to sleep. Really common to have sleeping problems. It can be just like an overactive mind, you know, maybe what you think of as an overactive imagination. But you know, the flip side of that, and I will talk about that in other lives and things. I will talk about the flip side of all these challenges, which are, you know, the great strengths and talents that people with ADHD have. And you know, the flip side of that is really creative mind. You know, and a mind that kind of doesn't rest. So it's brilliant as at being an entrepreneur and you know, seeing and grabbing opportunities and creating new things. Another thing is that it might be physical as well, but it might be something that you wouldn't notice so much. So people constantly, you know, fiddling with their hands or moving their feet. I know that I move my feet around a lot, and it's kind of, it's a way of, I know it can seem annoying to other people, but it's a way of regulating yourself, you know, sort of having to move, and it actually helps you to focus. Sometimes to actually sort of move your body. I've got a ring on this finger that I sit and play, you know, while I'm doing this video, I'm literally sitting and turning it and moving it on my finger, and that just kind of helps to keep me calm, helps my brain to sort of focus on what I'm doing. The other way that this presentation can show itself is in kind of excessive talking, chattiness, which is quite a sort of extroverted sort of personality. It can also be in impatience. So, you know, one of the questions on kind of in the assessment is to do with how well you manage to wait in a queue when you've got to wait for something, or you're waiting for an answer on something, you know, and you just want to know instantly. So that's kind of part of all of this hyperactivity. Interrupting other people is a big one as well, and it's usually just kind of excitement, and you know, sometimes it can come across as really rude, but it's almost like I need to say this before I forget it because it's going to drop out of my head. Finally, another sort of part of the hyperactive side of it is impulsivity. So you can do things and say things very impulsively without properly thinking through the consequences. It just feels like something that you kind of need to do now. So that, you know, that can lead to all sorts of difficult things. And you know, impulsive spending perhaps, and impulsive, you know, one of the things that I've always done is impulsively signed up to courses and things. You know, I've always wanted to learn new things, do new stuff, but I quite often overwhelm myself because I just sign up to, you know, I see something like, oh yeah, that's brilliant, sign up to that, you know, and just end up overwhelming myself. A few other things that are part of ADHD that aren't necessarily part of the diagnostic criteria but are really common things in ADHD. So I've mentioned sleep difficulties. That's often a big thing. Time blindness is another thing. So that's where it's really difficult to estimate time or to kind of feel time moving. So sometimes it can feel like time's going really slowly, sometimes time's going really, really quickly. Excuse me. And that can make it quite difficult to estimate, you know, how long a job's going to take, for instance. I used to be a freelance editor and proofreader and book project manager at one point, but I could only really do the book project management once I'd started to get a bit of a hold on this, because obviously it's really crucial. It's kind of, you know, I would have a client come and say, you know, we've got this job, can you tell me roughly how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost? And that, you know, I'd have to spend hours sometimes trying to kind of work this out. And in the early part of my career, I would really underestimate all the time. I always thought I could do something much quicker than I could. And then as I went on and on, I actually used apps and things to time my jobs. I kind of had a timesheet, and I would clock in on certain jobs, and gradually got a sense of how long things would take. But it took a really long time to kind of do that. The other thing, another big thing, which at the moment isn't part of the diagnostic criteria, but I think maybe in future, is emotional dysregulation. So it's really difficult to regulate our emotions. We feel things really strongly, good and bad. So, you know, extreme joy sometimes, but also, you know, extreme pain. And it can be really painful to have criticism or judgment. You know, there's often a big fear about things like that, which holds people back from doing things, which is one of the things that I'm trying to get over by doing these lives. Starting and finishing projects, really hard. If you have high interest in something, no problem at all. And that's where it can seem, I think, quite frustrating to people from the outside, because they don't really understand that. If you know, if someone's really interested in something, they can spend hours doing it. They can start and finish, no problem. If it's something they're not so interested in, it's so hard to make yourself start. The job can seem much bigger and more overwhelming than it actually is. Sometimes it's just that first little step. And then, yeah, so as well, it's described as an interest-based nervous system, which I think is a great description. But it's also based on urgency as well. So, you know, if there's a deadline, you can quite often get it done because you know it's urgent, and you can work on that. So it'll work on interest, it'll work on urgency. So if you haven't got a deadline, or not a tight deadline, and you're not particularly interested, it can just take so long to actually get the stuff done. And that's why you quite often get, you know, people saying, oh, you know, done nothing for a week, and then basically done a week's worth of work in one day, because it had to be in, you know, as a student, often, you know, staying up late at night the night before handing in an essay. That is so common. And the other thing is that new things, so the brain, the nervous system really works on novelty, loves new things, but it can quite quickly tire of those. So that's another thing of kind of, you know, say signing up for all these courses but then not actually finishing them, kind of losing interest after a while. Yeah, so, and then basically obviously you've got the one more thing I wanted to say was, you might hear the term executive function a lot. And that is kind of kind of cognitive processes in the brain that help you manage tasks. So it's things like managing time, organising, planning things, prioritising things, making decisions. It's kind of that like management part of the brain, and that's where it's those parts of the brain where the issues are with ADHD. So quite often it's help with things like that. So in a later life I will be talking about the things that help. So things like medication with ADHD, that can be really helpful, but it's different for everybody. There are different types of medication, and for me it's worked amazingly. So I have medication. Coaching is another thing, and that's the sort of thing that I do with people. So help them with the organisation, the planning, the decision making, prioritising, things like that. So I will talk more in depth about that kind of thing. But I think that's it for now, unless anybody's got any questions. Hi Nikki, hi Beverly, if you're still here. great to see you. Well, not see you, but see you saying hi. If anyone has any questions, let me know. But if not, I'll be back again next week at the same time. Next week's is going to be ADHD Unmasked, and that's where I'm going to be talking about things like diagnosis and comorbidities, which are conditions that often go alongside ADHD. So that will be next week. I think we'll leave it there then, and I hope it's been useful for anyone. I know that I did actually want to say, I know for a lot of people, especially if they have ADHD and are in this group, they will probably, like me, you know, it will be a special interest or hyper focus. So you probably know a lot about ADHD anyway, but I am aware that there are people in the group and kind of people generally who might see this video who don't know so much about it, and so that's why I'm just starting off talking about the basics and then going into more depth. And as I say, if I'm doing this every week, you know, I'll be picking different topics and going in more depth and everything. So if you have any ideas, any information that you particularly want to know about in future lives, just let me know. Just put it in the comments or send me a direct message, and I'll try and accommodate those in future. So thank you for watching. Thank you, Nikki. Wealth of knowledge and info. So interesting. Lovely. Thank you. Right. So I will see you next week, same time. Bye.